When a cocky session guitarist challenged James Brown to play guitar for $10,000, everyone thought it was easy money. But Brown didn't just play the solo. He played it so perfectly that the guitarist broke down crying and confessed something that changed his entire life. It was February 1971, and James Brown was at King Studios in Cincinnati, working on what would become one of his most important albums. The studio was packed with some of the best musicians in the business: horn players, drummers, bass players, and session guitarists who'd played on countless hit records. Brown was known for being demanding in the studio, sometimes requiring dozens of takes until he got exactly what he wanted. But he was also known for respecting musicians who brought their A-game. Among the session players that day was a guitarist named Tommy Hendrix. Tommy was 32 years old, classically trained at Berklee College of Music, and had played on records for major artists across multiple genres. He was technically brilliant, could read any chart put in front of him, and had developed a reputation as one of the most reliable session men in the business. He was also, as his colleagues would quietly admit, arrogant about his abilities. Tommy had been hired specifically for this session because Brown needed a guitarist who could handle complex arrangements. But from the moment Tommy walked into the studio, there was tension. He'd made comments to other musicians about Brown being just a showman, and questioning whether the godfather of soul really understood music theory, or if he just relied on his band to make him sound good. The session had been going for about 3 hours when Brown started working on a new arrangement. He was at the piano, sketching out ideas, humming melodies, and directing his band with that intuitive genius that had made him a legend. Brown would often work this way, feeling the music rather than writing it out formally, creating arrangements through demonstration rather than notation. Tommy was watching this process with barely concealed skepticism. Finally, during a break, he made a comment loud enough for several people to hear. "Must be nice to not actually have to know how to play your own music." The studio went quiet. Brown, who was across the room getting water, stopped mid-drink. He turned slowly to look at Tommy. "Excuse me," Brown said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. Tommy, emboldened by what he perceived as Brown's lack of formal training, doubled down. "I'm just saying, Mr. Brown, you've got all these great musicians doing the actual playing While I what?" Brown interrupted, walking toward him. "While you dance and sing," Tommy finished. "Look, no offense, but you're not really a musician in the traditional sense. You're an entertainer. There's a difference." The other musicians in the room exchanged nervous glances. Nobody talked to James Brown like this. Not because Brown was cruel or vindictive, but because he'd earned respect through decades of hard work and innovation. Brown studied Tommy for a long moment. "You think I can't play? I think you're a genius at what you do," Tommy said, his tone condescending. "But could you sit down and play a complex guitar solo? Could you read a chart and execute it technically? I doubt it." Brown walked over to where Tommy's guitar was leaning against an amplifier. It was a beautiful Gibson ES-335, the kind of instrument that cost more than most people's cars. Brown picked it up, feeling its weight. "How much you make for this session?" Brown asked. $200, Tommy said. "I'll tell you what," Brown said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'll bet you $10,000 I can play whatever solo you want me to play. You pick the song, you write it out if you want, and I'll play it, right now." The studio erupted in whispers. $10,000 was serious money in 1971, more than 6 months' salary for most people. Tommy's eyes went wide. This was too easy. He just challenged a dancer to a guitar competition. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. You win, you get $10,000 cash. I win. You owe me nothing, but you've got to admit in front of everyone here that you were wrong about me." Tommy's mind was already spending the money. There was no way James Brown, whose hands were designed for microphones and dance moves, could execute a technically complex guitar solo. This was like challenging a basketball player to perform surgery. "Deal," Tommy said, extending his hand. Brown shook it. "Pick the solo." Tommy thought for a moment. He wanted something that would be impossible for an amateur, something that required years of practice and technical precision. "All right, how about the main solo from Cold Sweat? Your own song. The section at 2:45. It's fast, it's complex, and it requires perfect timing." Brown nodded. "Write it out if you think I need it." "I will," Tommy said, grabbing manuscript paper and quickly transcribing the solo. It was a challenging piece, rapid-fire notes, complex rhythms, and a section that required precise finger placement on the fretboard. He handed the chart to Brown. Brown looked at the paper for exactly 5 seconds, then set it aside. Don't need it. He plugged the guitar into the amplifier and adjusted the settings. The way he handled the instrument, checking the tuning, adjusting the tone knobs, showed a familiarity that Tommy hadn't expected. But Tommy still wasn't worried. Lots of people could hold a guitar. Playing it was different. Brown positioned his fingers on the fretboard and looked at Tommy. You ready? Tommy nodded, already thinking about what he'd buy with $10,000. Brown began to play. The notes that came out of that amplifier were perfect. Not just correct, perfect. Brown played the solo exactly as it had been recorded, with every nuance, every subtle bend, every rhythmic accent, in precisely the right place. His fingers moved across the fretboard, with the kind of speed and precision that only came from years of practice. He wasn't just playing the notes. He was interpreting them, adding feeling and soul, while maintaining technical perfection. Tommy's smile disappeared. His face went pale. As Brown continued playing, executing every difficult passage flawlessly, Tommy's expression changed from confidence to confusion, to something that looked like devastation. Brown finished the solo with a flourish and set the guitar back on its stand. The studio was silent. I believe you owe me an apology, Brown said quietly. But Tommy didn't apologize. Instead, he did something nobody expected. He sat down on the floor, put his head in his hands, and started crying. Not quiet tears, but deep, racking sobs that shook his entire body. Everyone in the studio looked at each other, unsure what to do. This wasn't the response anyone had anticipated. Brown had won the bet decisively, but instead of gloating or collecting his metaphorical victory, he walked over and knelt down next to Tommy. Hey, Brown said gently. What's going on? Tommy looked up, his face red and wet with tears. I've been playing guitar for 20 years. 20 years. I went to Berkeley. I practiced 8 hours a day. I sacrificed everything to be technically perfect. And you, his voice broke, you just picked up the guitar and played it like it was nothing. That's not what's really bothering you, Brown said, his voice surprisingly soft. Tommy wiped his eyes. What? You're not crying because I played well. You're crying because you just realized something about yourself. What is it? There was a long pause. Finally, Tommy spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't love it anymore. Don't love what? Music, playing, any of it. Tommy looked at the guitar like it was a stranger. I used to love it. When I was a kid, I'd play for hours just because it made me happy. But somewhere along the way, it became about being better than everyone else, about proving I was technically superior, about getting the gigs and making the money, and having other musicians respect my abilities. I forgot why I started playing in the first place. Brown sat down on the floor next to him. And watching me play just now reminded you? You played with joy, Tommy said. Every note had feeling. You weren't trying to prove anything or show off your technique. You were just making music because you love making music. I saw what I used to be, and I realized what I've become. The other musicians in the studio had gathered around listening. This had gone from a bet to something much deeper. Let me tell you something, Brown said. I learned to play guitar when I was 8 years old. Taught myself because we were too poor to afford lessons. I've been playing for 30 years, almost as long as you. But you know why people don't know I can play? Because I don't need them to know. I don't need to prove I'm technically proficient. I need to make music that makes people feel something. But you're brilliant technically, Tommy said. You could have been a session guitarist, a jazz player, anything. Maybe, Brown acknowledged. But that's not what called to me. What called to me was performing. Connecting with audiences, making music that moved people's bodies and souls. The technical ability was just a tool to serve that purpose, not the purpose itself. Brown stood up and extended his hand to help Tommy to his feet. You want to know the real difference between us? It's not talent. It's not technical ability. It's that I never forgot that music is supposed to be joyful. The moment it becomes only about being better than someone else, you've lost the plot. Tommy took Brown's hand and stood. I don't know if I can get that back. Yes, you can, Brown said firmly. But you've got to let go of the ego. You've got to stop measuring your worth by how you compare to others and start measuring it by how the music makes you feel. Brown walked over to his own guitar and picked it up. Tell you what, forget the bet. I don't want your money and I don't want your apology. What I want is for you to play something with me right now. Not for the album, not for anyone but us. I want you to play something that made you fall in love with music in the first place. Tommy wiped his eyes, looking uncertain. Like what? Whatever speaks to you. What's the first song you learned to play? Tommy thought for a moment. My grandfather taught me Amazing Grace when I was 7. Simple melody, nothing fancy. Play it, Brown said, and don't think about technique or perfection. Just play it like you're 7 years old again. Tommy picked up his guitar with shaking hands. He started playing the familiar hymn, and at first his playing was hesitant, self-conscious, but as he continued, something shifted. The notes became less about precision and more about feeling. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing steadied. And by the time he finished, he was smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time since he'd walked into the studio. Brown nodded approvingly. There it is. That's the musician you're supposed to be. Thank you, Tommy said, and this time the words carried weight. I'm sorry for what I said about you not being a real musician. I know, Brown said, but understand something. I didn't play that solo to humiliate you or prove you wrong. I played it to teach you a lesson, not about me, about you, about what happens when ego replaces passion. The session continued, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Tommy played with a looseness and joy that surprised everyone, including himself. The parts he contributed that day ended up being some of the best work on the album, not because they were technically more complex than what he usually played, but because they had soul. After the session ended, Tommy approached Brown one more time. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you just take the $10,000? You won the bet fair and square. Brown smiled. Because money wasn't the point. You were drowning, and you didn't even know it. You were drowning in technique and ego and comparison. I recognize that because I've seen it happen to dozens of musicians over the years. Some of the most technically proficient players are the most miserable because they've forgotten why they started playing in the first place. Has it ever happened to you? Tommy asked. Losing the joy? Once, Brown admitted, back in the 60s. I was so focused on being successful, on competing with other artists, on proving I was the best, that I forgot to enjoy what I was doing. Then one night, I was performing, and I saw a kid in the audience, couldn't have been more than 6 years old, dancing with pure joy to my music. No judgment, no comparison, just joy. That kid reminded me what it was all about. Tommy nodded, understanding. What do I do now? You go home, Brown said, and you play music for yourself. Not for a session, not for money, not to impress anyone, just for you. And you keep doing that until you remember why you fell in love with it. Then, when you're ready, you bring that love to everything you play professionally. Years later, Tommy Hendrix would become one of the most sought-after session guitarists in the business, but for a different reason than before. Musicians wanted to work with him, not just because he was technically proficient, but because he brought joy and soul to every session. He'd often tell the story of the day James Brown won a bet without collecting, and taught him the most important lesson of his career. James Brown showed me that being a great musician isn't about being better than everyone else, Tommy would say in interviews. It's about being connected to why you started making music in the first place. It's about joy, passion, and remembering that music is supposed to move people's souls, not just impress them with your technique. The story of the $10,000 bet became legendary in music circles, but the real story, the one about redemption, remembering your purpose, and choosing teaching over humiliation, that story was even better. James Brown could have taken Tommy's money and his dignity. Instead, he gave him back his love of music. That's what real legends do. If this incredible story of humility, redemption, and remembering your passion moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded why they fell in love with their craft in the first place. Have you ever lost sight of why you started something you loved? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about music's greatest legends.